WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. I have my white-paneled 1983 Rick Dempsey-loving, Sammy Snyder giving it to me, Oriole hat on. It is opening day week here, and of course the Toronto Blue Jays in, the Orioles hoping upon hope to keep the pitching together. So I thought I'd bring in an innocent bystander in all this, a guy who's not an Oriole fan, he's not an Oriole hater, he is a baseball historian, he is a longtime visitor and friend here at WNST. I'm looking forward to having a few craft brews with him in Portland, Oregon in a couple of weeks before my U2 sojourn to the Pacific Northwest. We welcome Rob Neyer back on, the writer of all writings. What's going on, man? Happy baseball season to you. I know from following you on Twitter, this is a little bit of a national holiday for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was away rock climbing the last few days, but I came home early last night, a day early, and I didn't come home specifically for baseball, but it was nice to get up this morning and know there was a game on at 9 o'clock.
Yeah, you know, and I guess day by day, that's how this whole thing begins, is everybody rushes to the ballpark and gets hammered and doesn't remember much of it, and puts selfies up in the modern era, and, they win or they lose, but then there's 161 more, and that's always been the thing about baseball, is that there's too many games, but it's always there, when you want it, and there are very few people in this community that follow it the way you and I have our whole lives, and I think that that's the part that I lament, that's the part that bothers me, it's the part with the owner here that bothers me the most. Rob, I mean, you've been doing my station 20 years now, and on and off the air and all that stuff, to see what baseball has become in Baltimore, which is a place to get drunk on opening day, and then some people kind of hang in, but it never really attracts new people. People here over the last 15 years, no one has fallen in love with baseball and in the way that we did, 30, 40 years ago. And I think that's really, really a shame.
Well, I think that's probably true. Well, I wouldn't doubt that at all, because you're there. I will say this. From studies that have been done, it's actually pretty difficult to make people fall in love with teams unless they win championships. It may sound strange, but the fact is that when I was growing up, the Royals were outstanding year in, year out, and then finally won the championship when I was 18. I don't know for sure, but I suspect you're old enough to remember you were around for the 83 Orioles, probably a part of your youth.
A massive part. I mean, I was at all the games. I have a memory of, sitting up in the 700 level at the Vet for Game 5. I mean, my whole life's been about baseball. So, for me to see it not overwhelm the community in the way that it's overwhelmed. But I get it. I mean, it's an incredible, and here we have lacrosse too, Rob. I mean, you know what I mean? Half the kids, maybe more, play lacrosse. And that's the white kids, literally. I mean, in the African-American community, look around Camden Yards. Look around any yard. I went to 30 ballparks in 30 days, 2 summers ago. My overwhelming comment, if anybody said, is there anything you noticed? I'm like, yeah, everyone's white. Yeah, that's what I notice about it.
Well, that's absolutely true. And baseball does not have the same cultural impact that it did have 30 or 40 years ago. There's no question about that. I don't know if it's a baseball problem or if it's just the way life in America is now, where everybody has their own little pet passions. There are a million TV channels. There are shows on, I don't know, Amazon or Hulu or these others that people love that I literally have never heard of. And that's just, when we were growing up, I had 4 channels where I grew up. I guess 5 if you count PBS.
Well, baseball served its community and its fans with baseball cards, with ancillary marketing, things that the movie stars were doing. And I guess in the modern era, when I was a Kiss fan in 1978, and who wasn't, Rob? Right? You had to send $10 off in a stamp, and you got a fanzine once in a while. Professional wrestling, you had magazines to stay connected. In the modern era, if you're a Pearl Jam fan, you don't need them to be on tour. You can can kind of like hang out with them all day, every day if you want to. And I would agree with you. All the niches that are out there, baseball's just not all that appealing to all that many people in the way that it used to be. But guys like you and me are still kind of hanging on, and opening day means something to us, you know?
Oh, sure, it does. It means a lot, and I don't think that's ever going to change. There will always be people like us. There might just be fewer of them. But the good news is that while it might be harder for us to find people who are as passionate as we are, it doesn't like it's going to be difficult to find baseball for a long, long time because, as we talked about, baseball's revenues just go up and up and up every year. So while there might not be quite as many true diehards, there's no danger of this going away. So I expect to be enjoying baseball for as long as I live.
You know, Rob, I was out in Phoenix last week for the NFL owners meetings, and I made it over to Sloan Park. I saw the Cubs and the Padres B teams battle there for a little while. Padres just running around the bases, having a good time. And, you know, I got sick as a dog, and I came home, and I laid in bed for 4 days. And, you know, it's all I could do to pick my head up off the pillow. And it was during this period of sort of the wind down. You know, the Red Sox are playing the Nationals in Annapolis. But that new ballpark in Atlanta, it looks exactly like the old ballpark in Atlanta that they left. I mean, like literally all the camera angles, the way the seats are. But the difference is, and this maybe speaks to having two NFL teams move in the last 8 weeks, that I'm sure you're familiar with that as well. They have actual freezers for your beer holder in right field in the new Atlanta ballpark. Which,
right.
You know, it's 95 degrees there. I mean, that's where we are. That's the amenity you now need for your $12.50 craft beer is you need ice inside of the table to keep it cold. That's America.
Well, you're right, and it's baseball, and it's how you get people, I guess, to spend as much money as they charge for tickets. Although, in fairness, baseball is still, I think, the best value in sports in terms of going to the ballpark. When you look at what an NFL ticket costs or an NBA ticket, you can still get into a baseball game for, I don't know, $10 or $15, depending on the team, depending on the game, with dynamic pricing. I suspect you can get into a Twins-Royals game for $7 or $8 at some point this season.
I love how you call it dynamic pricing, taking on the industry term for scalping.
No, dynamic pricing, man. They price the tickets. We know it. You know, I mean, the teams themselves do it.
Oh, the rock stars, everybody's doing it. I got you. I mean,
I actually think it's great. If my goal is to see a game, just to see baseball, and I don't care who the teams are particularly, as long as it's Major League Baseball, I love dynamic pricing because that means I can get into a Major League ballpark for $7 or $8 or $10.
Well, that was bargain night back in our day, and the giveaways, and you know the bobbleheads chase everybody out there. And then there's, as you pointed out, winning helps a lot, right, Rob Neyer? And for the Orioles, and I've talked about this week, this is the time of the year where you really do assess, right? I'm not a guy like in February making my predictions or whatever. I haven't traditionally made predictions in the way I did when I was a younger man playing Stratomatic baseball back in the 70s and the 80s. But I looked at the Orioles and said, if you gave me $1, you know, would I bet the under or the over and what Vegas has them at? I think they're going to win 78 games this year, Rob. I think when you don't have a top-of-the-rotation guy who's healthy, that you can say on opening day, we've got that guy or we know we're getting that guy. This is a shoulder injury. He might not pitch this year. He may never pitch again. Who knows? But, you know, for Bundy and Gosman to be counted on, and then Wade Miley and Ubaldo Jimenez and a bunch of Norfolk guys, I'm very, very concerned, and I would say to them and the Blue Jays who are visiting this week, both of these teams, they're not as good as they were when we last saw them in October. I think they're both, to some degree, diminished teams.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's just right. I do wonder about the X factor for the Orioles because I do think Buck Showalter has a history, at least in recent years, of getting more out of his teams than we expect. So maybe if you believe in that, I'm not saying that anyone should, but if you believe in it, maybe reasonable is 81 or 82 wins rather than 78. Or maybe if the numbers say they're going to win 82, maybe it's 84 or 85. I don't think a manager is worth 7 or 8 games all by himself, but 2 or 3, maybe. I think that the Orioles are just one of a number of teams that could theoretically take advantage if the Red Sox falter, but all the numbers that I've seen suggest that the Red Sox are the team to beat, and that there's a fairly decent gap between them and whoever comes in second.
He is Rob Neyer. He is the writer of writings and a climber of climbings and now a watcher of baseball. He is a baseball historian. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Rob Neyer. He still writes from time to time. We never get worn out on this, right? This sort of annual who's good, who's not good, or can the Orioles do it? The Cubs. Everybody is just waiting out October on them, right? Like they're just a shoe-in to do it again because it was so easy to do the first time, right?
Yeah, that's right. They just cruised in through the World Series. Look, there are two reasons why the Cubs are such big favorites, at least relatively speaking, to win the World Series. The first reason is that they're really good. They're just as good on paper as they were a year ago. Well, I shouldn't say a year ago because a year ago they didn't look quite as good as they looked at the end of the year. But by the end of the year, of course, they looked outstanding, and they were outstanding. It wasn't some sort of mirage. Their run differential for the entire season was tremendous. It was one of the best in many years, and then of course they won the World Series and looked very impressive doing it. It wasn't a cakewalk, and of course they came maybe a good one pitch or two from losing to the Indians, but they were outstanding last season, qualitatively and quantitatively, no question. But that doesn't mean they're going to be as good again, or that they're going to win the World Series, especially win the World Series. That's hard. That's really hard to do, and especially because here's the other reason, by the way, that they are big favorites is because they won. And so we still have that memory so fresh in our minds. They looked so good. Well, of course they're going to win.
There's no way the Falcons can be favorites next year. They lost. Right? I mean, there's no way you'd say, well, I like the Indians more. You just wouldn't say that, right?
Right. You wouldn't. That's right. We there's something called recency bias, and we tend to focus on what we have most recently seen and give that more weight than we probably should. In the Cubs' case, they're really good, but guess what? So are the Dodgers. The Dodgers, on paper, are just as good right now as the Cubs are. Does that mean that they'll both win 98 games? No. One of them probably will be a little better than the other one. I would argue that it's impossible to know which is going to be better. So the only reason maybe to like the Cubs' chances more is that I suppose you could argue that the Dodgers face somewhat better competition in the Giants than the Cubs face for the division title. But other than that, it's not a big difference. Other than that, I don't think there's any reason to think the Cubs have a better chance at winning the World Series than the Dodgers do.
I think the reason to really like the Cubs would be ascending players, younger players that are getting better. Certainly the Orioles have that in Machado, if there's such a thing as getting better. Certainly Scope. We saw those guys on display at the World Baseball Classic, and I'll get to that in a minute. But for the Orioles last year, it is incredible, and I know what a historian you are. I know how many bubblegum cards you collected because I did the same thing, and we looked at all these, the back of the bubblegum cards. How many times in my life I've seen a player have 37 home runs and only 96 RBIs, and then a guy on the same team with 38 home runs and 84 RBIs, and another guy with 29 home runs and 83 RBIs. It was really, really bizarre, the lack of productivity, but this speaks to baseball with this, I'm going to walk, I'm going to strike out, or I'm going to hit a home run. Getting guys on base. This is a beer league softball team the Orioles have put together, and I know it's not all sabered up like a lot of. It's not a Billy Beane organization. The Orioles. Buck doesn't manage that way. It's just not the way Peter would even have the franchise be. But all that being said, they've tried to put together this sort of bopper approach to it, and it looks nice. It looks nice when you got Stratomatic players, right? But then you got to go out and play, and you got to play defense, and somebody's got to pitch. And so much of this has been out there that, power hitting has been, guys are unemployed who hit 25 home runs, right?
That's right. Great example, Ryan Howard, who hasn't been a good player in quite a while, but did hit a lot of home runs last year and had a huge second half. Hasn't done him any good. Home run. There are so many players hitting home runs now that you have to do more than just hit home runs. You also, I shouldn't say you had. There are players in the majors who that's all they do. It's tougher to find work than it used to be if that's all you do, because that commodity power is just not as rare as it once was. And you mentioned the Orioles, tons of home runs, 217 last year, third in the American League. They didn't score as many. They weren't as good when it came to scoring runs because, as you know, they didn't get on base much. A 308 team on base percentage is these days it's not terrible, but it's not nearly as good as their power was. That's how you wind up having a player with 30-some home runs and fewer than 90 RBIs. Part of that is maybe not hitting all that well when guys are on base, but most of it probably is just not having guys on base. That's why there is more to scoring runs than just power. Home runs are great. They're even greater, more valuable if there are 2 or 3 guys on base ahead of them. Earl Weaver knew that better than anybody ever.
He is Rob Neyer. You can follow him out on Twitter at Rob Neyer, longtime baseball follower. So, if not the Cubs, then whom? You've spoken so highly of the Dodgers. What do you think of some of these other teams, like the Indians, that stole the bat of Encarnacion away from the Blue Jays, and I've been talking about that around here this week. Certainly the Red Sox have been hyped plenty, and Nationals down the street, and if the Mets can hold their pitching together, there's some other pretty good teams out there. Some teams that I would say any of those teams I mentioned, they're all going to win 90 games in my mind, right?
That's right. Really, there are clear favorites in every division, which I don't think is the case most years. But aside from the Cubs and the Dodgers, the Nationals also look good again, as they do almost every year. Of course, as usual, the Mets also look very good if all their or most of their starting pitchers stay healthy, which hasn't happened yet. But if it did, that could be really, really interesting. In the American League, you're right. The Red Sox and the Indians with Encarnacion, look, they won 94 games last year, almost won the World Series. They were missing one of their best players in Michael Brantley. They were missing down the stretch 2 or 3 of their top starting pitchers. With everybody back and healthy so far anyway, they're huge favorites in the AL Central. And I think 90-plus wins is a highly reasonable expectation for them. I think probably on paper the most interesting division is the AL West, where the Astros got better this winter. This is supposed to be their year. Remember, I think it was 3 years ago, Sports Illustrated put the Astros on the cover as your 2017 World Series champions. So this is it. Does it mean it's going to happen? No, of course not. And they were really good 2 years ago and lost in the wild card game to the Royals. But they were good 2 years ago. Last year was a step backward, not uncommon for a team that makes a big leap forward, as they did in 2015, to fall back a little bit.
Dude, I fell all over them last year. I bought in, hook, line, and sinker. They were just like everybody's buying into the Colorado Rockies this year, right? There's a lot of that going on. People are buying into the Mariners, a little bit of that going on as well. I know you've had some angst with that out in your part of the world as well, but it's easy in these. It's a lot easier to just say, well, look at the Cubs and the Red Sox and the Indians. They're the best. They're the Dodgers. They're the best teams. But somebody somewhere is going to make some noise. I don't think it's going to be the Orioles, quite frankly. I think it's more likely to be the Astros or the Mariners or the Rockies. I don't see any of those teams in the Central and the National League making any noise. And I know people have been on the Marlins, but I mean, you look at their offseason and the tragedy. That's not a good situation there. I still see, like you see, the cream of the crop in a couple of these divisions. But I think the Yankees are really interesting, Rob.
They're interesting. It's not clear yet how interesting they're finally breaking in new players, and Gary Sanchez had that tremendous second half last year. Actually, it was less than that. It was basically 2 months. So we'll see. I think the Yankees, their rebuilding effort, and they actually committed to it, surprisingly, probably is not quite ready yet for, say, 90 wins, but sometimes those things happen sooner than you expect. So sure, they're one of the teams, along with the Blue Jays and the Orioles. And look, I have a friend who's pretty smart who thinks the Rays are going to be better than people expect. So, again, if the Red Sox aren't as good as we expect, and I think that's largely because their starting pitching falls apart, at least to some degree, who knows who takes advantage? Could be a really interesting division all season long.
Dude, cut up jerseys, man. and got his way out of Chicago. It's a beautiful story, man. That'll make a good book if they win the World Series. He is Rob Neyer. He writes books and things and stories, and you can find him out on Twitter at Rob Neyer. That's Neyer. Up in beautiful Portland, Oregon, where I'm finally going to show my face at some point in early May. Rob, always great having you on, man. We'll be following your followings and checking you out on Twitter, man. Always great to have you on.
Look forward to seeing you.
You got it. Rob Neyer, baseball historian, joining us here on WNST. You can find us out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere you are. Our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That is brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And if there's breaking news, you're always going to get that first on the WNST Tech Service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, and Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend. Baseball season. We got the Caps, got the Wizards, Ravens getting ready for the draft. We got the Liars Luncheon this week. And, of course, our London trip that many of you are already on. If you're not on, throw me a note. We're still offering the $100 off discount for anybody that's been on the WNST road trip in the past to join us on this one. We're going to extend that offer to the trips, Green Bay, Minnesota, Nashville, and Oakland, Vegas, wherever the Raiders are going to play. I'm just going to start saying wherever the hell the Raiders are going to play. Maybe the P.F. Chang's near you. Who knows? That was a Mark Davis joke. If you don't know that one, look it up. I am Nestor. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.